Sign the non-disclosure agreement right now, Beatrice, or we will withdraw the £400,000 offer and file a legal claim for ownership of your logistics algorithm anyway. Julian, the senior recruiter at Vanguard Tech Solutions, sneered through the Zoom grid. My blood ran cold inside my small rented flat in Manchester. He was not offering me a stellar career, he was holding a corporate gun to my head, demanding I give up the master code I had spent 4 agonizing years developing during my university days. He thought because I was a 24-year-old independent female programmer, I would easily bend to his intimidation. I took a slow, deep breath, looked directly into my laptop camera, and felt a sudden wave of calm wash over me. My name is Beatrice Vance, and I have spent my entire youth sacrificing my social life to master predictive logistics code. I raised my chin and spoke with absolute clarity. No. The answer is completely no. I reject your offer, and I reject your intimidation. Julian's smug, patronizing face instantly froze into a rigid mask. The digital clock on the bottom right of my desktop monitor clicked over to 10:14 a.m. 10 seconds passed. 30 seconds. For 47 agonizing, abusive seconds of dead, heavy silence, he just stared at me through the screen, his eyes warping from corporate confidence into pure, unadulterated malice. He did not move a single muscle, trying to break my spirit with psychological pressure. At exactly 48 seconds, he finally spoke. He did not scream. He just whispered, "You have just blacklisted yourself from the industry, Beatrice. Check your inbox." The Zoom connection severed with a sharp digital click, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the dark screen. Before I could even process the threat, my mobile phone began to vibrate violently against the wooden desk. It was an automated, high-priority email blast sent from Julian's agency server, routed directly to every major technology firm, venture capital fund, and software incubator in the United Kingdom. My hand shook slightly as I clicked the notification. The subject line read, "Ethical liability and security warning, Beatrice Vance." My heart sank into my stomach as I read the body of the message. Julian had completely falsified a professional report, framing me as an unstable corporate saboteur who stole proprietary data from clients. He was systematically destroying my reputation and executing my professional career in a single click, ensuring no one would ever hire me again. A follow-up text message popped up on my phone screen from his private number. "Good luck paying your rent now." I sat in total shock, completely exiled from the very industry I had given my life to build, feeling entirely isolated in the quiet room. The sheer injustice of it burned in my chest. If this intense opening moment makes you furious about corporate bullying, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from right now and what time it is there, because I read every single one. Now, let me tell you how this nightmare escalated. As the initial wave of panic threatened to overwhelm me, my laptop screen suddenly flickered violently. The bright email window vanished, replaced by a black command prompt window that began executing lines of code automatically. I scrambled for my keyboard, thinking Julian was actively wiping my hard drive, but the green text typed out a message instead: "Do not panic, Beatrice." He used the same blacklist tactic on me last year. A secure, encrypted video link opened automatically on my desktop, revealing the face of Arthur Sterling. I gasped slightly. Arthur Sterling was a reclusive technology billionaire who had been mysteriously ousted from the very global conglomerate that funded Julian's recruitment agency just 1 month ago. Arthur looked exhausted but intensely focused through the camera stream. He explained that Julian was not just a simple recruiter, he was a highly paid, ruthless cleanup man for a massive intellectual property theft ring operating inside the highest levels of the conglomerate. They targeted independent developers, stole their work, and used the threat of a career-ending blacklist to force them into silent submission. Arthur had been monitoring my predictive logistics algorithm for months, recognizing its revolutionary potential to change global shipping. "They do not just want to buy your code, Beatrice," Arthur said, his voice grave. "They are launching your entire logistics architecture under their own corporate name tomorrow morning at the London Tech Summit. They needed you blacklisted today so you would lack the credibility to fight them in court." Arthur leaned closer to his camera, his eyes burning with an intense desire for justice. I am proposing a legal counterstrike, he said quietly. I have millions of pounds in liquid capital, but I lack the master encryption key and the uncorrupted source code to break the conglomerate's monopoly. I will back you with £1.5 million in immediate seed funding. We will build an independent competitor entity, protect it, and launch it to the public before Friday's opening bell. The sudden validation of my hard work was intoxicating, but the sheer terror of what he was suggesting made my head spin. I was a single independent programmer working from a small flat, and he was asking me to go to war against a trillion-pound corporate titan that practically owned the market. The stakes were incredibly high. If we failed, I could face bankruptcy or prison. But the memory of Julian's abusive silence and his arrogant text message hardened my resolve. I looked at Arthur and nodded firmly. Let us do it. I am in. Arthur smiled grimly and began typing on his end to wire the initial corporate funds to my account. I opened my online banking app to confirm the transaction, but the screen suddenly flashed bright red with an error message that made my heart freeze. Account frozen by High Court order. Access denied. I ran out of my flat and sprinted 3 blocks down the street to my local bank branch, my breath catching in my throat. I demanded to see the branch manager, throwing my identification card onto his desk. The manager looked at the computer screen, then looked up at me with an expression of deep pity and discomfort. I am incredibly sorry, Miss Vance, but the asset freeze did not originate from a technology firm or a commercial lawsuit. It is a domestic asset protection injunction filed early this morning by your fiancé, Alistair. I staggered back against the wall, the room spinning around me. Alistair, a senior financial analyst whom I had trusted completely for 3 years, had used our joint bank accounts and his knowledge of my personal financial data to file an emergency legal claim. He had officially stated to the court that I was experiencing a severe psychological episode and was burning through our savings because I had irrationally rejected a £400,000 job offer. He had locked me out of every single penny of my own personal money. Just as I stumbled out of the bank manager's office, my mobile phone rang. It was Alistair. I answered it, my voice shaking with rage. He spoke in a calm, chillingly corporate tone. I did this for our future, Beatrice. Julian promised me a senior vice president role at the firm if I brought you to heel. Just sign the code over. The deep heartbreak of his betrayal lasted for only a fraction of a second before it completely hardened into an absolute, icy fury. Alistair had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, but he had severely underestimated the woman he was dealing with. I did not scream at him over the phone. I simply disconnected the call and walked back to our shared apartment with an unshakable sense of clarity. I dragged 3 empty duffel bags out of the wardrobe. While Alistair had been busy plotting with Julian and filing fraudulent court documents, he had completely forgotten that I was the one who designed and built our home's entire local server network. Every single piece of research, financial data, and backup code was stored on a central drive in our study. I sat down at the main terminal, bypassed his primitive security passwords within 3 minutes, and began systematically wiping every single shared server node we owned. I did not leave a single byte behind for him to exploit, replacing our entire shared history with completely corrupted, unrecoverable data strings. Just as I zipped the final duffel bag packed with my clothes and my private developmental hardware, the front door clicked open. Alistair walked into the living room, flanked by 2 corporate lawyers in expensive gray suits and a uniformed police officer. There she is, Alistair shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at me while trying to look like a victim. Officer, she is attempting to leave the property with highly sensitive, proprietary hardware belonging to my financial consultancy firm. She is unstable and destructive. The police officer stepped forward cautiously, his hand resting near his utility belt, demanding I step away from the bags. I did not panic. I calmly reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a neat plastic folder, and handed the documents directly to the officer. Inside were the original commercial invoices and tax receipts for every single server component, laptop, and hard drive in the apartment. Every single item had been purchased solely under my independent business registration name before I had even met Alistair. The officer reviewed the paperwork carefully, closed the folder, and turned to look at Alistair with deep annoyance. This is a civil matter, sir. Do not waste our time again. I picked up my 3 duffel bags, walked right past my stunned fiancé without uttering a single word, and left him standing in an empty apartment with nothing but corrupted data. I took a taxi directly to a secret, off-grid warehouse workspace in the industrial district that Arthur Sterling had secured for us under a hidden shell company name. But the moment I booted up my encrypted master laptop, a bright red alert flashed across the screen, warning, unauthorized brute force access attempt from University of Cambridge network. 8. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I immediately went on the defensive. I did not just block the cyber attack, I actively traced the incoming IP address, running a reverse network exploit that bypassed their security firewalls and forced the intruder's local webcam to activate right on my monitor. The live video feed revealed a small, cluttered laboratory room at the University of Cambridge, where a 22-year-old postgraduate student was sitting in front of a monitor, tears streaming down her pale face. When she realized her own camera had been turned on, she gasped and stared into the lens in absolute terror. "Please do not report me to the university or the police," she sobbed hysterically, her voice cracking through the audio stream. Julian's recruitment agency completely stole my master's thesis on predictive logistics last term. Yesterday, they told me that if I do not use this secret administrative backdoor to copy your master algorithm for their launch, they will immediately cancel my student visa and deport me. The sheer scale of Julian's corporate malice was sickening. Instead of growing angry at the student, a cold, calculated focus washed over me. I realized exactly how to turn their own weapon against them. I leaned toward my microphone and spoke softly. "Do not cry. What is your name?" She whispered that her name was Penelope. I smiled grimly. "Keep hacking me, Penelope. But let me show you exactly what code to take back to them." Penelope and I spent the next 4 hours carefully constructing a digital trap. We fed Julian's engineering team a highly sophisticated tracking Trojan, meticulously masquerading as my master logistics algorithm. To their systems, it would look like they had successfully stolen my prize asset, but in reality, it gave me a permanent window into their entire network architecture. However, Julian was a ruthless professional, and he was not done playing dirty in the physical world. The very next morning, as I stepped out of a quiet coffee shop near the warehouse, a burly man in a dark suit completely blocked my path on the pavement. Without saying a word, he thrust a thick stack of legal documents directly into my chest and walked away. I opened the packet to find a formal lawsuit for a staggering £10 million. The conglomerate was suing me in the High Court for corporate defamation and breach of precontractual faith, claiming that my public, aggressive rejection of their £400,000 job offer had actively tanked their private market valuation ahead of their major tech summit launch. Attached to the lawsuit was a heavily edited, doctored audio clip of our 47-second Zoom call. They had completely altered the audio to make it sound like I was an unhinged extortionist, threatening to destroy their servers unless they paid me millions of pounds in cash. They wanted to play a dangerous game with data, but they forgot that data was my absolute domain. I returned to the warehouse, locked the heavy security doors, and spent 36 hours straight without sleep, running a meticulous forensic audit on the conglomerate's public financial filings against the internal server footprint that Penelope's connection had provided. As the sun began to rise on Thursday morning, the lines of financial code suddenly fell into place, revealing a massive, terrifying anomaly. I discovered that the conglomerate was not just stealing independent software to improve their systems. They were actively using the automated efficiency projections of my algorithm to artificially inflate their asset values and mask a massive, multi-million-pound black hole of debt in their operational costs. They were lying to their public investors and the government, committing massive securities fraud on a global scale, and using my software as the ultimate digital camouflage. If my algorithm did not launch in their system tomorrow, their entire financial deception would collapse within weeks. I stared at the evidence, my eyes burning from exhaustion but my mind entirely sharp. I did not call the police, and I did not leak the data to the press. Instead, I compiled the raw, unedited financial audit into a secure file and emailed it directly to Julian's personal mobile phone with a calendar invitation for the following morning. At precisely 9 a.m. on Friday, I walked into the conglomerate's massive glass skyscraper in central London, accompanied by Arthur Sterling and 2 senior forensic investigators from the Financial Conduct Authority whom Arthur had quietly briefed. We were escorted into a penthouse boardroom where Julian and Alistair sat at a long mahogany table, surrounded by 12 high-priced corporate attorneys who looked down at me with immense arrogance. Julian adjusted his silk tie and smirked. "You are completely outmatched, Beatrice. Sign the full intellectual property transfer right now, or we will release the extortion tape to the media, execute the £10 million lawsuit, and ensure you spend your 20s in a federal prison cell." Alistair nodded eagerly beside him, looking smugly at his new corporate master. I did not say a word. I simply opened my laptop, turned it around, and slid it across the polished wood table. The screen displayed the live, updating forensic audit of their hidden offshore debt channels. The Financial Conduct Authority investigators sitting next to me are already pulling your primary server transaction logs, Julian, I said, my voice completely steady. You have exactly 10 minutes to explain this multi-million-pound fraud to them before they issue a global freezing order on your entire corporate entity. The massive boardroom went so dead silent that you could hear the distant humming of the building's ventilation system. Julian's high-priced lawyers took one look at the flashing data logs on my laptop screen, exchanged terrified glances, and immediately closed their leather folders in unison. The lead attorney stood up, refusing to look at Julian. "We are withdrawing our legal representation of this firm effective immediately," he said stiffly, walking straight out of the room, followed by his entire team. Alistair completely panicked, his face turning an ashen white as he realized his grand corporate promotion had just vanished into thin air. He grabbed Julian by the collar of his jacket, his voice cracking with desperation. "You told me she was just a stupid, broke-code monkey. You told me she would cave the moment I froze her accounts." Julian slammed Alistair backwards into the table, his eyes wild with pure malice as he glared at me across the room. He breathed heavily, his corporate composure completely shattered. "It does not matter what your little audit says, Beatrice," Julian snarled, his voice trembling with rage. "The Global Tech Summit livestream launch occurs in exactly 1 hour. The software deployment is entirely automated. The code will be live across millions of devices globally, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." We were aggressively escorted out of the building by security, but the trap had already been set. Arthur and I raced back to our off-grid command center, where Penelope was waiting with her fingers poised over her keyboard. The massive global launch countdown monitors ticked down relentlessly, 40 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes. The conglomerate's Tech Summit livestream was being broadcast to over 3 million venture capitalists, technology journalists, and international investors worldwide. At exactly 11:58 a.m. Julian stepped onto the grand, brightly lit stage in the London auditorium, looking completely confident as he introduced the revolutionary, trillion-pound logistics platform that they had stolen from me. He gave a sweeping speech about innovation, artificial intelligence, and the future of global shipping, never mentioning my name once. At precisely 12 p.m., he turned toward a giant digital screen on the stage and pressed a ceremonial, glowing Go Live button to initialize the global network. The moment his fingers touched the glass, the entire high-definition livestream broadcast suddenly went pitch black for 3 million viewers worldwide. It was immediately replaced by a massive, pulsing red warning symbol that locked every single terminal in the auditorium. The tracking Trojan that Penelope and I had fed their servers through the university backdoor executed with flawless, devastating precision. The exact moment Julian initialized their global distribution network, my hidden code systematically overrode their primary administrative routing protocols. Instead of deploying their fraudulent software, their entire multi-million-pound infrastructure was automatically forced to redirect its data flow to point directly to my newly registered independent company, Vance Logistics. They had spent millions of pounds building the perfect global launch vehicle, hiring the stadium, and gathering the world's wealthiest investors, but my master algorithm had just completely hijacked their entire system to advertise my own brand to their clients. Julian stood frozen on the stage in front of the cameras, his face turning bright red as a massive, legally certified copy of a high court asset freeze order, signed by a senior judge just 20 minutes prior, flashed on the giant stadium screen directly behind his head for the entire world to see. The text explicitly detailed their massive securities fraud and intellectual property theft, completely ruining the conglomerate's reputation in front of their entire investor base within a single second. By Friday evening, the global financial markets had reacted with total devastation. The conglomerate stock value had entirely collapsed by 85%, wiping out billions of pounds in market capitalization and triggering a massive criminal investigation by the authorities. Alastair was terminated from his financial banking firm within minutes of the broadcast due to his direct proximity to the fraud and the impending court cases. At precisely midnight, as I sat in the quiet warehouse drinking tea, my mobile phone began to ring. It was Alastair. I answered it, remaining completely silent. He was weeping hysterically into the receiver, his voice completely broken and stripped of all its former corporate arrogance. "Beatrice, please, you have to help me," he sobbed desperately. "The bank is repossessing my car, and they are foreclosing on the apartment because of the legal fraud claims. I owe Julian's shadow backers over £300,000 in personal liabilities. Please, just release a public statement saying it was all a technical glitch. I still love you so much, Beatrice. We can fix this." I listened to his pathetic, desperate begging for a few moments, feeling entirely cold and detached from his emotional manipulation. "I build logical systems, Alastair," I replied calmly. "I do not fund bad investments." I blocked his number permanently. 6 months passed after that chaotic Friday, and the technology landscape had radically shifted in our favor. Vance Logistics was now formally valued at a staggering £40 million by independent market analysts, operating out of a gorgeous, light-filled office space with floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the Manchester skyline. We had successfully captured 40% of the UK's shipping coordination market within our first half-year of operation. I had officially hired Penelope as my head of research and development, providing her with a lucrative salary and fully sponsoring her permanent residency visa so she would never have to fear deportation again. I established ironclad, unshakable corporate rules for my new empire, fair market wages for every single employee, total transparency in our financial reporting, and absolute, unconditional legal protection for independent creators against corporate exploitation. I was finally building a successful life completely on my own terms. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, a courier arrived at my desk, delivering a thick, certified manila envelope postmarked directly from a minimum security federal correctional facility. I opened the packet to find a long, handwritten letter written on lined paper. The signature at the bottom belonged to Julian, who was currently serving a 5-year prison sentence for corporate fraud and market manipulation. I pulled the pages out of the envelope and began to read his neat, cramped handwriting. "Beatrice, I have spent my entire professional career breaking independent people for money," Julian wrote. "When you looked at me and went completely silent for 47 seconds on that Zoom call, I was not just angry at your defiance. I experienced a sudden, terrifying realization that for the first time in my 30 years in this industry, I was looking at a programmer who could not be bought, blackmailed, or broken by corporate power. Your absolute refusal to cave saved me from committing an even larger financial crime that would have ruined thousands of lives. My former chief executive officer kept a secondary, completely off-ledger server hidden in Zurich to store stolen assets. They blamed me for everything, so here are the master access keys to their system." Attached to the back of the letter was a single sheet of paper containing the precise decryption codes and network pathways to a hidden dark pool bank fund containing over £50 million in stolen technology assets that the conglomerate had hidden from the government liquidation courts. Arthur Sterling walked into my spacious office just as I finished analyzing the encrypted Swiss server data on my terminal. He looked over my shoulder at the staggering financial figures displayed on the monitor and whistled low. "With these decryption keys, Beatrice, we have the legal power to quietly buy out our remaining 3 European competitors and dominate the entire continental market by next month. It is a highly profitable legal gray area, and no one would ever know it came from Julian." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, looking at the glowing rows of stolen millions, then looked up into Arthur's eyes with absolute certainty. "We do not build our corporate future on stolen foundations, Arthur. We are better than the people who tried to destroy us." Without a single second of hesitation, I forwarded the entire encrypted Swiss ledger and the access keys directly to the Corporate Fraud Liquidation Victims Fund, completely giving up the massive cash windfall so it could be distributed to the hundreds of small independent developers Julian's firm had defrauded over the last 10 years. My refusal to touch the dirty money quickly leaked to the financial sector, causing our brand's global integrity to skyrocket to unprecedented heights. A week after our ethical choice went viral, a premier global mega fund offered to acquire Vance Logistics for a staggering, life-changing sum of £250 million. It represented absolute financial freedom for generations to come. The entire corporate board gathered in our main conference room on Friday morning, eager and sweating with anticipation, waiting for me to sign the final papers. I sat at the head of the table, looking across at the lead investor, a senior billionaire who radiated the exact same patronizing, patriarchal corporate arrogance that Julian had displayed months earlier. He adjusted his expensive watch and offered a thin, condescending grin. "We will finalize the purchase of your company today, Beatrice," the investor stated smoothly. "But as part of the transition terms, you must immediately step down as chief executive officer. We need a more experienced, traditional face to reassure the public markets during our global expansion." The entire room descended into a breathless, tense silence. Every single man around that table waited confidently for the young female coder to capitulate to the massive payday and hand over her life's work. I did not hesitate for a single second. I slowly stood up from my chair, reached across the polished table, and picked up the thick and signed acquisition contract. Without breaking eye contact with the stunned lead investor, I dropped the entire document directly into the roaring corporate paper shredder beside my desk. "The answer is completely no," I said, my voice echoing with an absolute, unshakable authority that stunned the room. "This company belongs to me, and I do not step down for anyone." The venture capitalist sat in a breathless, absolute silence, realizing that no amount of money could ever buy my soul or my autonomy. I walked calmly out of the boardroom to continue building my global logistics empire on my own terms, surrounded by people who respected my worth. I was 25 years old, completely independent, and I held absolutely zero regrets about standing my ground. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If my story resonated with you, and if you believe that protecting your independence is never selfish, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with boundaries. Remember, you never owe anyone your future just because they have power. You get to choose exactly what you build.